The rain on Fifth Avenue didn't care that Emily was holding a 3-week-old baby, or that she had no coat. It only cared about soaking her to the bone as the heavy oak door of the townhouse slammed shut behind her, locking her out of the only life she knew. Inside that warm house, her husband Mark was pouring a celebratory scotch, laughing with his mistress, believing he had finally cut the dead weight loose. He thought he had won. He thought Emily was just a penniless, exhausted housewife with nowhere to go. He had no idea that just 45 minutes earlier, a certified letter had arrived in Emily's name. He had no idea that the shivering woman on his doorstep was technically the new owner of the very skyscraper he worked in. Mark Reynolds had just kicked out a billionaire, and when he found out, it would be too late to beg. The silence in the Reynolds household was never peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. It was a Tuesday, late October in Chicago, and the wind was already howling against the frosted glass of the kitchen window. Emily wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, flinching as the harsh smell of bleach stung her nose. She had been scrubbing the marble countertops for 20 minutes, trying to get a coffee stain out that her mother-in-law, Linda, had accidentally left there that morning. "Is it clean yet?" The voice came from the doorway. Linda Reynolds stood there, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that cost more than Emily's entire wardrobe before she got married. Linda didn't look at Emily. She looked at the counter, her lip curled in a permanent sneer. "Yes, Linda," Emily said, her voice raspy. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her newborn son, Leo, was going through a sleep regression, screaming through the night with colic, and Mark had banished them to the guest room because he needed his rest for the big merger at work. "It still looks dull," Linda criticized, walking over and running a manicured finger over the stone. She inspected her finger, found nothing, but wiped it on a napkin anyway with a grimace. "My son works 18 hours a day to pay for this house, Emily. The least you can do is maintain it. It's not like you're contributing anything else to this marriage." Emily bit her tongue. The taste of iron filled her mouth. "Don't cry," she told herself. "Do not give her the satisfaction." "I'm doing my best, Linda. Leo was up all night and—" "Oh, stop using the child as an excuse," Linda snapped. "Women have been raising children for thousands of years without letting their homes fall into squalor. Look at you. You're still wearing those sweatpants. Mark will be home in an hour. Do you want him to see you looking like a homeless person?" Emily looked down at her grey sweatpants. They were the only thing that fit comfortably after the C-section 3 weeks ago. Her incision still ached when it rained. "I'll change," Emily whispered. "See that you do, and make something edible tonight. Not that slop you made on Sunday." Linda turned on her heel and marched into the living room, turning up the volume on the television. Emily leaned against the sink, closing her eyes. She felt dizzy. 2 years ago, she had been a vibrant art history student working at a gallery in the Loop. That was where she met Mark Reynolds. He had been charming then, ambitious, handsome, sweeping her off her feet with dinners at a Billionaire and weekend trips to Lake Geneva. He had promised her a life of partnership. But the moment the ring was on her finger, the partnership ended. Mark became the king, and she became the subject. And when she got pregnant, she became a burden. The sound of the front door unlocking made Emily's stomach drop. He was home early. She quickly smoothed her hair and rushed to check the roast chicken in the oven. It was perfect. She pulled it out just as Mark walked into the kitchen. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered in a tailored navy suit, but his face was tight with stress. He didn't look at her. He went straight to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. "Hi, honey," Emily said softly. "How was work?" Mark took a long swig of water before slamming the bottle down. "Disaster. The Vanguard deal is stalling. Old Man Vanguard died, and the lawyers are freezing assets until the heir is verified. It's a mess." "I'm sorry," Emily said, reaching out to touch his arm. He pulled away as if she had burned him. "Don't. I'm not in the mood." He looked her up and down, his eyes cold. "Is that what you're wearing?" "I was just cleaning." Linda said. "Linda is right," Mark interrupted. "We have a guest coming for dinner. Go upstairs and put on something decent. And for God's sake, put some concealer on those bags under your eyes. You look like a corpse." Emily froze. "A guest?" "Mark, the house is a mess, and Leo is due for a feeding in 20 minutes. Mark slammed his hand on the counter, making the silverware jump. "I don't care about the feeding schedule, Emily. This is Jessica Thorne. She's the senior consultant on the Vanguard merger. If I impress her, I get the lead on the account. If I get the lead, I make partner. So you will go upstairs, you will put on the black dress I bought you, and you will sit at this table and smile. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes, Mark." She hurried out of the kitchen, passing Linda in the hallway. Linda smirked. "Better hurry, Cinderella. The clock is ticking." As Emily climbed the stairs to the nursery, she didn't know that this dinner wasn't just about business. It was the beginning of the end. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:00 p.m. Emily had managed to shower and squeeze into the black cocktail dress. It was tight around her waist, pressing uncomfortably against her healing body, but she had done her hair and applied makeup to hide the exhaustion. She had settled Leo in his crib, praying he would sleep for at least 2 hours. She walked down the stairs just as Mark opened the door. Standing on the porch was a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine. Jessica Thorne was stunning. She wore a crimson blazer over a silk blouse, tailored trousers, and heels that looked like weapons. Her blonde hair was a sleek curtain, and her smile was predatory. "Mark," she purred, stepping inside and kissing him on the cheek, lingering just a second too long. The traffic on Lakeshore Drive was murder. But your house, it's charming. A bit quaint, but charming. "Jessica, welcome," Mark said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the charming man Emily used to know. "Please come in. Let me take your coat." Emily stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Hello, I'm Emily, Mark's wife." Jessica turned her gaze to Emily. Her eyes swept over her, analyzing the cheap earrings, the slightly tight dress, the postpartum swelling. There was no warmth in her eyes, only amusement. "Oh, right." "The wife," Jessica said, extending a limp hand. "Mark talks about you? Occasionally? I didn't realize you were so domestic." Mark laughed nervously. "Emily is a homemaker. She's great with the domestic stuff. Dinner should be ready, right, Emily?" "Yes," Emily said, withdrawing her hand. "It's in the dining room." The dinner was an exercise in humiliation. Mark and Jessica sat on one side of the table, discussing high finance, stocks, and the chaotic state of the Vanguard Corporation inheritance. Emily sat opposite them, silent, pushing peas around her plate. Linda sat at the head of the table, doting on Jessica. "So, Jessica, tell me, where did you study? Harvard?" "Yale, actually." Jessica smiled, sipping the wine Mark had poured. A vintage bottle he had told Emily was too expensive to open for their anniversary last month. "And then I did my MBA at Wharton. Mark and I have been working very closely on the Vanguard file. He's quite talented." Jessica's foot brushed against Mark's leg under the table. Emily saw the tablecloth move. She saw Mark stiffen, then relax, a flush rising on his neck. "So," Jessica continued, ignoring Emily entirely, "the rumor is that the Vanguard heir is illegitimate. Some secret child the old CEO had decades ago. Nobody knows who it is, but whoever they are, they're about to inherit $4 billion in assets, real estate, and tech holdings. Can you imagine? Some nobody suddenly holding the keys to the kingdom. It's wasted on them, Mark scoffed, cutting his steak aggressively. Probably some uneducated leech who will blow it all on cars and drugs. People like that don't know how to handle power. That's why we need to secure the board seats before the heir surfaces. We need to control the transition. Exactly, Jessica said, her eyes locking with Mark's. We need to be in control, in the boardroom, and everywhere else. Emily felt sick. The air in the room was thick with sexual tension between her husband and this woman. She placed her fork down. "Mark," Emily said quietly, "can I speak to you in the kitchen for a moment?" Mark stopped chewing. The table went silent. "We are eating, Emily. It's rude to interrupt." "Please," she insisted, her voice trembling. Mark sighed, rolling his eyes at Jessica. "Excuse me for a moment. Domestic duties call." He followed Emily into the kitchen, the swinging door shutting behind them. He immediately spun on her, his face twisting into a snarl. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed. "You are embarrassing me." "You're embarrassing yourself, Mark," Emily whispered furiously. "She's touching you under the table. Do you think I'm blind? You're drinking our anniversary wine with her. You're flirting with her right in front of me and your mother." Mark laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Oh, grow up, Emily. Jessica is a vital connection. She can make my career, unlike you. I am your wife." "And what a prize that is," Mark sneered, stepping closer, looming over her. "Look at you. You're a mess. You have nothing in common with me anymore. You talk about diapers and spit up. Jessica talks about markets and mergers. She challenges me. You just exist." Emily felt like she had been slapped. "I exist because I'm raising your son." "And I pay for it all," Mark shouted. "I pay for the roof, the food, the clothes on your back. So if I want to have a business dinner, you shut your mouth and pour the wine. Don't you dare ruin this for me, Emily. I'm warning you." Before Emily could respond, a high-pitched cry echoed from the baby monitor on the counter. Leo was awake. "Great!" Mark threw his hands up. "The siren goes off. Go handle it. And don't come back down. I'll finish dinner with Jessica and Linda. You've done enough damage for one night." Mark turned and walked back into the dining room, smoothing his suit jacket. Emily stood alone in the bright, clinical light of the kitchen, tears streaming down her face as her son's cries grew louder upstairs. She didn't know it then, but there was a reason the Vanguard heir hadn't been found yet. The lawyers were looking for a woman named Emily Vance, but she had changed her name to Reynolds. The connection was about to be made, and it would happen tomorrow. The morning sun hit the dirty dishes in the sink with a harsh, unforgiving light. The dinner party had ended late. Mark had stayed up drinking brandy with Jessica until 1 a.m., laughing at inside jokes while Emily rocked a colicky Leo in the nursery upstairs. When Emily came down at 6:30 a.m., the house smelled of stale alcohol and expensive perfume. Jessica's perfume. Mark was already in the kitchen, nursing a black coffee and checking his phone. He looked hungover, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a strange, manic energy about him. "I need my grey suit dry cleaned by tonight," he said, without looking up. "And don't cook dinner. I'll be late." Emily poured herself a glass of water, her hand trembling slightly. "Mark, about last night. I felt very uncomfortable with the way Jessica spoke to me, and the way you let her." Mark slammed his phone onto the island. "Jesus, Emily. Are we really doing this now? I am trying to secure a future for this family. Jessica is the key to the Vanguard deal. If I have to flirt a little to get the contract signed, that's what business requires. You would know that if you had ever worked a day in a real job." "I worked at the gallery for 4 years," Emily defended quietly. "Selling paintings to tourists is not business," Mark scoffed. He grabbed his briefcase. "I'm leaving. Try not to destroy the house while I'm gone. And keep the kid quiet. Linda complained that his crying woke her up 3 times last night." With the slam of the front door, he was gone. Emily sank onto a kitchen stool, burying her face in her hands. She felt hollowed out. She looked at the pile of dirty dishes, the crystal wine glasses stained with lipstick, and felt a wave of despair so deep she thought she might drown in it. "Is this my life?" she thought. "Maid, nanny, punching bag?" At 10:15 a.m., the landline rang. Emily ignored it at first, assuming it was a telemarketer or one of Linda's friends calling to gossip. But it kept ringing. Persistent, urgent. She picked it up. "Hello? Reynolds residence. Good morning. I am attempting to reach Mrs. Emily Reynolds, formerly Emily Vance." A deep, authoritative voice said. "My name is Arthur Sterling, senior partner at Sterling, Roth and Associates in New York." Emily frowned. "This is she. Is something wrong? Is it a bill?" "Quite the opposite, Mrs. Reynolds," the man said. His tone was grave but respectful. "I am the executor of the estate of the late Victor Vanguard." Emily froze. The name from the dinner party. The billionaire whose death had caused Mark so much stress. I don't understand. Why are you calling me?" "Mrs. Reynolds, were you aware that your mother, Sarah Vance, worked in New York in the late 1980s? "Yes," Emily said, her heart starting to hammer against her ribs. "She was a secretary. She died when I was 10. She was Victor Vanguard's personal executive assistant for 3 years, Arthur Sterling corrected. And according to documents recently unsealed from Mr. Vanguard's private safe, she was also his partner. Mr. Vanguard was aware of your birth, Emily. He wanted to acknowledge you, but your mother fled the city to protect you from the scrutiny of his life. She wanted you to have a normal childhood." The room seemed to spin. Emily gripped the counter. "What are you saying?" "I am saying, Mrs. Reynolds, that the DNA test we ran against the medical samples from your son's birth, which are public record in the hospital database, is a match. You are Victor Vanguard's only biological child." Silence stretched over the line. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove past outside. "The search for the heir is over," Arthur continued, his voice softening. "You are the sole beneficiary of the Vanguard estate. This includes the controlling share of Vanguard Corp., the real estate portfolio, and liquid assets. The total valuation as of this morning's market opening is approximately $4.2 billion. Emily's legs gave out. She slid down the cabinet to the floor, the phone pressed to her ear. $4 billion. This has to be a joke," she whispered. "It is not a joke. I have a courier on his way to your residence now, with the certified documents and a temporary debit card with an access limit of $5 million for your immediate needs. I need you to sign for them." "Does anyone else know?" Emily asked, panic rising. "No one," Arthur said. "We maintain strict confidentiality. However, once the probate is filed next week, it will be public record. For now, you hold the most powerful cards in Chicago, Mrs. Reynolds." Emily hung up the phone in a daze. She looked around the kitchen, the granite countertops she had scrubbed until her hands bled, the floor she had swept, the house that belonged to Mark, where she was just a guest. She wasn't a guest anymore. She could buy this house. She could buy the whole street. She could buy Mark's company and fire him. But as the shock wore off, a different emotion flooded in. Hope. She thought of Mark's face, the stress, the anger, the desperation to make partner. She thought of how money was the root of all their arguments. He was cruel because he was stressed. He was mean because he was scared of failure. If I tell him, she thought, tears springing to her eyes, he won't be stressed anymore. We can be free. Linda won't have to live with us. We can move to a house where I don't have to be a maid. This could save us. She stood up, wiping her eyes. She wouldn't buy him out. She would save him. She would fix her marriage. At 11 a.m., the courier arrived. Emily signed the papers with a shaking hand. She held the thick envelope against her chest, feeling the weight of the heavy bond paper inside. It was real. She decided to make a special dinner. She would tell him tonight. She would put the papers on his plate. She didn't know that Mark was currently sitting in a hotel room downtown with Jessica Thorne, and they weren't discussing the merger. They were discussing how to get rid of Emily. The storm broke over Chicago around 5 p.m. Rain lashed against the windows, turning the sky a bruised purple. Emily had spent the afternoon preparing. She had ordered Wagyu beef using the last of the grocery money Mark gave her, and prepared a truffle risotto. She had put Leo down for a nap. She had even lit candles. The envelope from Arthur Sterling sat on the mantelpiece, waiting. She wore her favorite dress, a soft blue silk that Mark used to say matched her eyes. She felt nervous, giddy, and terrified all at once. At 6:30 p.m. the front door opened. "Mark!" Emily called out, stepping into the hallway. "Dinner is almost—" She stopped. Mark wasn't alone. Linda was with him, which was normal. But Jessica Thorne was there too. And there was a fourth person, a man in a cheap suit carrying a briefcase. Mark didn't look at her. He shook his umbrella out on the floor, not caring about the puddle. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her hands twisting together. "Mark, I made dinner. I have news. Big news." Mark looked up then. His face was a mask of stone. There was no love in it, not even the residual anger from the morning, just a cold, flat determination. "We're not eating, Emily," Mark said. "Sit down." "But who are these people?" "This is Mr. Henderson," Mark gestured to the man. "My attorney." Emily's heart stopped. She looked at Jessica, who was leaning against the doorframe, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her red lips. Jessica crossed her arms, looking at Emily like she was a bug to be squashed. "Attorney," Emily whispered. "Sit down," Linda barked from the couch. "Stop making a scene and listen to my son." Emily sat on the edge of the armchair. She felt small. The envelope on the mantelpiece seemed a million miles away. Mark walked over to the coffee table and dropped a stack of papers on it. They landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. "I'm filing for divorce, Emily," Mark said calmly. The world tilted. "What?" "I'm filing for divorce," he repeated, slower, as if speaking to a child. "This marriage isn't working. It hasn't worked for a long time. You're unhappy. I'm certainly unhappy. And frankly, you're a dead weight." "Dead weight?" Emily choked out. "Mark, I raise your son. I clean your house. I support you." "You do the bare minimum," Mark shouted, his composure cracking. "Look at you. You have no ambition, no drive. You're just there. Jessica and I have been talking. We realized that for me to reach my potential, I need a partner who understands my world, not a housewife who thinks cleaning a counter is a day's work." Jessica stepped forward, sliding her hand onto Mark's shoulder. He didn't pull away. He leaned into it. "It's for the best, Emily," Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Mark needs to be free to ascend. You're holding him back. We're going to be a power couple. You can't compete with that." Emily looked at the two of them. The betrayal was so physical, it felt like a knife in her gut. You're leaving me for her? I'm leaving you for a better future, Mark corrected. He pointed to the papers. I've had Henderson draw up a fair agreement. I'll give you a monthly stipend for 6 months, enough to get a small apartment in the suburbs. Maybe you can go back to selling pictures or whatever you did. And Leo? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Leo stays here, Linda interjected sharply. He's a Reynolds. He belongs in this house. You can visit him on weekends. Supervised, of course. We can't have you dragging him to whatever slum you end up in. No, Emily stood up, a sudden surge of adrenaline flooding her veins. No, you are not taking my son. I have the best lawyers in the city, Emily, Mark said coldly. I have money. You have nothing. Who do you think the judge will give custody to? The vice president of a hedge fund or the unemployed woman with 0 assets? Emily stared at him. The irony was so sharp it almost made her laugh. 0 assets. She looked at the mantelpiece. The envelope was right there. Inside was proof that she could buy and sell Mark Reynolds 100 times over. Mark, she said, her voice steadying. You are making a mistake. A huge mistake. I have something to tell you. Something that changes everything. I don't want to hear your begging, Mark sneered. I don't want to hear your promises to do better. It's too late. It's not begging, Emily said. She took a step toward the mantelpiece. It's about money. I received a letter today. I don't care about your mail, Mark roared. He grabbed her arm, stopping her. I want you out. Now. Mark, listen to me, Emily cried out. I inherited. I said out. Mark shoved her. It wasn't a hard shove, but Emily was wearing socks on the hardwood floor. She slipped. She stumbled back, her hip slamming into the side table. A vase, Linda's favorite Ming vase, wobbled and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Silence filled the room. Linda let out a shriek. My vase! That was $3,000! You clumsy, useless cow! Mark looked at the broken porcelain, his face turning purple. That's it. Get out. Right now. Mark, please. Get your things and get out, Mark screamed. I don't want you in my house another second. Henderson, serve her the eviction notice. The lawyer stepped forward and shoved a paper into Emily's chest. Mrs. Reynolds, you are hereby notified to vacate the premises immediately due to destruction of property and hostile behavior. You can't do this, Emily sobbed. It's pouring rain. I have nowhere to go. Not my problem, Jessica said, checking her watch. We have a dinner reservation at Le Bernardin to celebrate the divorce. You're making us late. Mark grabbed Emily's arm and dragged her toward the door. Wait, Leo! Emily screamed, fighting him. I'm not leaving without my son. Take him then, Mark yelled. Take the crying brat. He's been screaming all week anyway. Do me a favor and take him so I can finally get some sleep. Mark dragged her to the foot of the stairs. Go. Pack a bag. You have 5 minutes. If you're not out, I'm calling the police and telling them you attacked my mother. Emily scrambled up the stairs, sobbing. She ran into the nursery. Leo was awake, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. She grabbed the diaper bag. She stuffed in as many onesies, diapers, and formula cans as she could fit. She grabbed her coat. She ran back down the stairs, clutching her baby to her chest. Mark was standing by the door, holding it open. The rain was blowing in, soaking the expensive foyer rug. Give me my keys, he demanded. Emily fished her car keys and house keys out of her pocket and dropped them in his hand. Good luck, Emily, Mark said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Try not to ruin the next guy's life. He pushed her out onto the porch and slammed the heavy oak door. The sound was like a gunshot. Emily stood there, the rain instantly soaking through her silk dress. The cold wind bit into her skin. She shielded Leo with her body, wrapping her coat around the bundle. She was shivering. She was homeless. She was alone. She looked at the closed door. She could hear laughter from inside. They were celebrating. Emily turned and walked down the steps, the water squelching in her shoes. She walked to the curb, looking up and down the dark, rain-swept street. She reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers brushed against the cold plastic of the temporary debit card Arthur Sterling had sent. She pulled out her phone. It was wet, but it still worked. She dialed the number Arthur had given her. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice breaking. "Mrs. Reynolds, is everything all right?" "No," Emily said, looking back at the house that had been her prison. "I need a car, and I need a hotel, the best one you have." "I understand," Arthur said, his voice tightening. "I will have the company limousine there in 10 minutes. And Mrs. Reynolds?" "Yes." "We will make them pay." Emily looked at the lighted window of the living room. She could see Mark pouring champagne for Jessica. "Yes," Emily whispered, her eyes hardening as the tears washed away in the rain. "We will." A long, black Rolls-Royce turned the corner, its headlights cutting through the storm like eyes of a predator. The billionaire had officially entered the game. The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was quieter than a cathedral. The only sound was the soft hum of the tires on the rain-slicked asphalt and the quiet snuffling of Leo, who had finally fallen asleep against Emily's damp chest. Emily sat frozen, water dripping from her hair onto the plush leather seats. She felt numb. The adrenaline of the eviction had faded, replaced by a bone-deep chill that wasn't just about the weather. The image of Mark's face as he slammed the door, the absolute lack of humanity in his eyes, kept replaying in her mind. "Where to, Mrs. Reynolds?" the driver asked, his eyes kind in the rearview mirror. "Not Reynolds," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. She looked down at her sleeping son, then out the window at the passing city lights. "Vance. My name is Emily Vance." "Very well, Miss Vance. Mr. Sterling suggested the Peninsula. It is secure, and they are expecting you." When they pulled up to the gleaming entrance of the Peninsula Chicago, doormen with umbrellas swarmed the car. Emily felt a wave of shame. She looked like a drowned rat in cheap sweatpants and a ruined silk dress, carrying a baby wrapped in a coat. But the staff didn't blink. The manager was waiting in the lobby. "Miss Vance," he said with a deep bow. "Welcome. We have prepared the grand suite for you. Mr. Sterling has arranged everything. Please allow us." A staff member gently took her diaper bag. Another offered a warm towel. They didn't look at her with the disdain Linda always had. They looked at her with reverence. It was the first time in 3 years Emily realized that money didn't just buy things, it bought respect, or at least the appearance of it. Up in the 3,000-square-foot suite, which was bigger than the entire house she had just been kicked out of, Emily finally broke down. She laid Leo in the ornate crib the hotel had provided and collapsed onto the king-sized bed, sobbing until her throat was raw. She cried for the girl she used to be, for the marriage she thought she had, and for the sheer terror of being alone with an infant. But as the tears dried, something else took their place. A cold, hard anger. Mark had thrown them away like trash. He had chosen a soulless career climber over the mother of his child. She sat up, walking into the palatial bathroom. She looked at herself in the brightly lit mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her hair was a frizzy mess, and her posture was defeated. She looked exactly like the woman Mark despised. "No more," she whispered to her reflection. The next morning, Arthur Sterling arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. He was a man of about 60, dressed in an impeccable Savile Row suit, with eyes that were sharp but kind. He sat across from Emily in the suite's living room, spreading documents out on the coffee table. "Emily," he began gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but your father, Victor, was a man who believed in preparation. He left you a very specific infrastructure." He walked her through it. The numbers were staggering. $4.2 billion wasn't just money, it was an economy. She owned shipping lines, pharmaceutical patents, vast tracts of land in Montana, and, most importantly, the controlling stake in Vanguard Corp. Emily ran her finger over the Vanguard logo on a document. "This is the company Mark is trying to merge with." "Correct," Arthur said, a dry smile touching his lips. "Mark Reynolds works for Apex Capital. Apex is currently trying to acquire a 20% stake in Vanguard's tech division. It is the deal that will make his career. He has leveraged everything on it: his reputation, his finances, even his mother's retirement fund, from what my sources tell me." Emily felt a jolt. "He gambled Linda's money?" "Mark is desperate to keep up appearances with Jessica Thorne. He's renting a penthouse he can't afford and leasing a Porsche. He needs this merger bonus to avoid bankruptcy within 60 days. Arthur leaned forward. "The merger is currently stalled because the Vanguard board was waiting for the heir to be identified. As the majority shareholder, Emily, you are the board. You have the final veto." The realization hit Emily like a physical blow. The power shift was absolute. Mark wasn't just her ex-husband, he was her employee. He was begging for crumbs from a table she now owned. "He doesn't know," Emily whispered, a dangerous thrill running through her. "No one knows," Arthur confirmed. "Your identity is currently protected under a John Doe filing until the final probate hearing in 3 weeks. Emily stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Michigan Avenue. The rain had cleared, leaving a crisp, cold autumn day. She saw the people down below, tiny ants rushing to work. Yesterday, she was one of them. Today, she was a god, towering over the city. "Arthur," she turned back to him, "I need to learn. I need to understand every single thing about Vanguard Corp. I don't just want to inherit it. I want to run it." "Your father hoped you would say that. I have tutors arranged in corporate law, finance, and business strategy ready to start tomorrow." "Good. And Arthur?" Emily pointed to her reflection in the window. The sweatpants, the messy bun. "Burn these clothes. Get me the best stylist in Chicago. If I'm going to be a billionaire, I need to look like one. The victim died in the rain last night. It's time for Emily Vance to be born." Arthur Sterling smiled, and it was a genuine, predatory smile. "It will be my pleasure." 4 weeks later, the transformation was total. The woman who stepped out of the black SUV in front of the towering glass monolith of the Vanguard building bore no resemblance to the cowering housewife of the Reynolds kitchen. Emily Vance wore an Italian-tailored power suit in charcoal grey that accentuated her newly toned figure. Her hair, once a messy afterthought, was now a sleek, sharp-angled bob that framed her face like a helmet of gold. Her makeup was flawless, emphasizing eyes that had lost their softness and gained a steely resolve. She wore no jewelry except for a simple, devastatingly expensive Cartier watch. She didn't just walk. She glided with a lethal grace, her heels clicking a rhythm of power on the marble pavement. Arthur walked beside her, looking like a proud general accompanying his queen. "Are you ready?" he murmured. "I've been ready since he pushed me down the stairs," Emily replied coolly. They entered the massive atrium lobby of the Vanguard building. It was a space designed to intimidate, with 50-foot ceilings and waterfalls cascading down stone walls. Today was the day of the Apex Vanguard merger meeting. The lobby was buzzing with high-level executives. Emily spotted Jessica Thorne near the security desk, looking impatient, tapping away on her phone. Jessica looked up as Emily passed, her eyes narrowing in confusion. She didn't recognize the sleek woman in the $5,000 suit at first glance. Then Mark burst through the revolving doors. He looked frantic. His tie was slightly crooked, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the cold November air. He had spent the last month drowning in debt, dodging Linda's calls about the bills, and trying to keep Jessica happy while she grew increasingly bored with his stalling finances. Today was his Hail Mary pass. If the deal went through, he was saved. He was rushing toward the elevator banks when he nearly collided with Emily. "Watch where you're—" Mark started to snap, then stopped dead. He stared. It was Emily, but it wasn't. This woman radiated wealth and confidence. She looked incredible, better than Jessica on her best day. "Emily," he breathed, total confusion clouding his face. "What? What are you doing here? How did you get past security?" Emily stopped, turning slowly to face him. She looked him up and down, mirroring the exact look of disdain Jessica had given her at that dinner party. "Hello, Mark. You look tired." Her voice was smooth, calm, and utterly indifferent. Mark bristled, his ego trying to assert itself over his confusion. "I'm busy, Emily. I have the biggest meeting of my career upstairs. If you're here to beg for more alimony, you need to call my lawyer. You can't just show up at my place of business in some costume." He gestured nervously at her suit, knowing deep down it was real quality. Jessica walked over, her heels clicking sharply. "What is going on here? Mark, we are late." She looked at Emily, a flicker of genuine jealousy crossing her face. "Well, well, the little housewife got a makeover. Who paid for it? Did you find a sympathetic credit card company?" Emily ignored Jessica entirely. She kept her eyes locked on Mark. "I'm not here for alimony, Mark," Emily said. "I'm here for work." "Work?" Mark let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "What are you applying to be a receptionist? We aren't hiring, sweetie. Go home and take care of the kid." Arthur stepped forward from behind Emily. Mark recognized him instantly. Arthur Sterling, the legendary corporate attorney from New York. Mark's stomach dropped. Why was Sterling with his ex-wife? "Mr. Reynolds," Arthur said coldly, "Miss Vance is not applying for a job." "Miss Vance has a 10 a.m. board meeting," Emily corrected smoothly. She turned toward the private express elevator, reserved only for C-suite executives and board members. A security guard immediately stepped forward, scanned a pass Emily held up, and the golden doors slid open. Mark watched, his jaw practically on the floor. "Wait, you can't go up there. That's the executive elevator. Security! Stop her!" The security guard looked at Mark with a bored expression. "Her credentials are valid, sir." "Step back, please." Emily stepped into the elevator. She turned to face Mark just as the doors began to close. The look on his face, a mix of fury, confusion, and dawning terror, was sweeter than any champagne. "See you in the boardroom, Mark," she said softly. The doors shut, severing the connection. Upstairs in the 40th floor boardroom, the entire board of directors of Vanguard Corp was waiting. The long mahogany table was filled with powerful men in grey suits. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, the chair that had belonged to Victor Vanguard for 40 years. The doors opened, and Emily Vance walked in. The room fell dead silent. These men had heard rumors of an heir, but they expected some spoiled trust fund kid. They didn't expect this vision of corporate power. Emily walked to the head of the table. She placed her leather portfolio on the mahogany surface. She didn't sit down immediately. She stood behind her father's chair, placing her hands on the back of it, claiming it. She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every man there. "Gentlemen," Emily said, her voice clear and authoritative. "My name is Emily Vance. I am Victor Vanguard's daughter, and as of this moment, I am the new chairwoman of this board." A murmur ran through the room. "We have a busy agenda today," she continued, sitting down in the massive leather chair. It fit her perfectly. "Our first order of business is the proposed merger with Apex Capital." She opened her portfolio. "Send in Mr. Reynolds and his team. I believe they are anxious to learn their fate." The double doors of the boardroom swung open. Mark Reynolds walked in first, flanked by Jessica Thorne and two junior analysts from Apex Capital. They were smiling, carrying the confident air of people who believed the deal was already done. Mark had spent the last 24 hours mentally spending his bonus, a new boat, a trip to St. Bart's, maybe a diamond bracelet for Jessica. Mark froze mid-step. At the far end of the 30-foot mahogany table, sitting in the chairman's seat, was Emily. She wasn't serving coffee. She wasn't taking notes. She was sitting back in the leather throne, fingers steepled together, staring directly at him with eyes as cold as a Chicago winter. To her right sat Arthur Sterling. To her left, the CFO of Vanguard, a man Mark had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. "What is this?" Jessica hissed under her breath, her smile faltering. "Why is your ex-wife sitting in the chairman's seat?" Mark felt a flush of anger rise up his neck. This was insane. She must have slept with someone. That was the only explanation. She had seduced some old board member to get a seat at the table just to humiliate him. He marched forward, placing his hands on the back of a guest chair, but he didn't sit. He looked at the CFO, Mr. Henderson, a different Henderson than his lawyer. "Mr. Henderson," Mark said, his voice tight. "I apologize for the intrusion. It seems there has been a security breach. My ex-wife is unwell. She seems to have wandered into the meeting. If you could call security, we can remove her and proceed with the presentation." The room went deadly silent. The board members didn't look at Mark. They looked at Emily. Emily didn't blink. She didn't shout. She simply leaned forward, the leather of the chair creaking softly in the silence. "Please sit down, Mr. Reynolds," Emily said. Her voice was unrecognizable to him. It held an authority he had never heard in the kitchen. "You are here to pitch the Apex merger. We are waiting." "I am not pitching to you," Mark snapped, losing his cool. "You are a housewife, Emily. You don't know the difference between a stock option and a soup spoon. Get out of that chair before you embarrass yourself further." Arthur Sterling cleared his throat. It sounded like a gavel banging. "Mr. Reynolds," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the air. "You are addressing the majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board of Vanguard Corp. Ms. Emily Vance owns 51% of the voting stock of this company. If she tells you to sit, you sit. If she tells you to jump, you ask how high on the way down. Do I make myself clear?" Mark felt the blood drain from his face. The room spun. He grabbed the chair for support. "Majority. Shareholder?" he whispered. That's impossible. She's broke. I just kicked her out of my house." "You kicked out the daughter of Victor Vanguard," Arthur corrected. "A $4 billion mistake, Mr. Reynolds." Jessica Thorne let out a gasp. She looked from Emily to Mark, her eyes widening in horror as the calculations ran through her head. She physically took a step away from Mark, distancing herself from the blast radius. Emily smiled. It was a small, terrifying smile. "Sit down, Mark," she repeated softly, "and pitch me. Convince me why I shouldn't crush your little company into dust." Mark sat. He collapsed into the chair, his legs jelly. He looked at his presentation notes, but the words swam before his eyes. He looked at Jessica for help, but she was staring at the floor, refusing to meet his gaze. We, Mark stammered. The synergy between Apex and Vanguard. Speak up, Emily commanded. I can't hear you. Mark took a breath, trying to salvage his dignity. He'd launched into his pitch, but it was a disaster. He fumbled the numbers. He forgot his key points. Emily let him speak for 10 minutes. Then she raised a hand. Stop. She opened the file in front of her. Your proposal values Vanguard's tech division at $800 million. But according to my internal audit, which I conducted last week, our patents alone are worth $1.2 billion. You're trying to undervalue us to secure a quick win for your quarterly bonus. Mark gaped. The market valuation? Furthermore, Emily continued, flipping a page, Apex Capital is over-leveraged. You're using debt to finance this acquisition. If this deal doesn't go through, Apex defaults on its loans to Deutsche Bank within 30 days. Isn't that right, Jessica? Jessica's head snapped up. Ms. Vance, You're desperate, Emily said, closing the folder. You came here thinking you could rob a headless company. You thought the heir was missing, so you could strip the assets for parts. But the heir is here, and she knows exactly what you are. Emily stood up. The entire board stood with her. The proposal is rejected, Emily declared. Vanguard will not be merging with Apex. Furthermore, I am instructing our legal team to file a complaint with the SEC regarding Apex's predatory valuation practices. Mark stood up, knocking his chair over. Emily, you can't do this. If this deal fails, I lose everything. I lose my job. I lose the house. The house? Emily tilted her head. Oh, the one you kicked me out of in the rain? The one where my son had no roof over his head? I was stressed, Mark pleaded, sweat pouring down his face. Emily, please, for the sake of our past, for Leo. Do not say his name. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You gave up the right to be his father when you told me to take the crying brat and leave. You wanted a business partner, Mark? You wanted someone who understands your world? She leaned across the table, inches from his face. Welcome to my world. Get out of my building. Security, Arthur signaled. 2 large guards stepped forward. Mark looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but there were none. He looked at Jessica. Jessica, say something. Jessica looked at Emily, then back at Mark. I think you should leave, Mark. You've done enough damage. You're with me. I'm with the winner, Jessica said coldly. She turned to Emily. Ms. Vance, I had no idea about the personal history. I was misled by Mr. Reynolds. I would love to discuss a position at Vanguard if you're hiring. Emily laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh. Jessica, you have gumption, I'll give you that. But I don't hire traitors. And I don't hire women who help men kick babies out into the rain. Security, take Ms. Thorne, too. As the guards dragged a screaming Mark and a protesting Jessica out of the boardroom, Emily sat back down. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She looked at the board members. They were looking at her with new respect. Now, Emily said, smoothing her suit, let's discuss the acquisition of the competitor. I believe Apex Capital's stock is about to plummet. I'd like to buy it for pennies on the dollar. 6 months later, the charity gala at the Art Institute of Chicago was the event of the season. Cameras flashed as limousines deposited the city's elite onto the red carpet. Emily Vance stepped out of her Bentley, wearing a stunning emerald gown that hugged her figure. She held herself with the easy grace of a woman who had faced the fire and forged herself into steel. On her arm was not a man, but Arthur Sterling, her mentor and friend. She walked past the press line, smiling as reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Vance, is it true Vanguard profits are up 40%? Emily, any comment on the acquisition of Apex?" She just smiled. Inside, the hall was glittering. As she sipped champagne, she overheard a conversation near the bar. A group of young bankers were laughing. "Did you hear about Mark Reynolds?" one asked. "The guy who blew the Vanguard deal?" "Yeah, total wipeout. Apex fired him for cause, so he got no severance. His wife, well, ex-wife now, bought the company that held his mortgage. He got foreclosed on last week. Brutal. Where is he now? I heard he's working sales at a used car lot in Cicero, or maybe driving Uber. And the girlfriend, Jessica, she moved back to Ohio. Nobody in Chicago would touch her resume." Emily turned away, feeling a sense of closure. She didn't feel glee. She just felt finished. Karma had done its work. She didn't need to twist the knife. She walked out onto the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The wind was cold, but she wasn't shivering. Her phone buzzed. It was the nanny, a picture of 6-month-old Leo, smiling, clutching a stuffed bear. "All tucked in, Miss Vance." He said, "Mama," today. Emily smiled, tears pricking her eyes. She wasn't just a billionaire. She was a mother who had protected her child. She had built a fortress around him that no one could ever breach again. She looked out at the lights of Chicago. Somewhere out there, in a cheap apartment, Mark Reynolds was probably watching the news, seeing her face on the screen. He was probably drinking cheap beer, regretting the moment he closed that door. But Emily didn't care about Mark Reynolds. She turned her back on the city and walked back into the light, ready for the next chapter. The victim was gone. The queen had risen, and she was just getting started. And that is the story of how one cruel decision cost a man $4 billion. It's a reminder that you should never judge someone by their lowest moment, because you never know when the tables will turn. Mark thought he was kicking out a burden, but he was really kicking out his own future. Emily proved that the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's success. Massive, undeniable success. What would you have done if you were Emily? Would you have destroyed Mark, or would you have given him a second chance? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.